As we get ready for our final panel of the day, I also would like to take a moment and recognize our silver sponsors: Crowley Fleck, Eide Bailly, Montana Department of Commerce, Montana's credit unions, Montana Secretary of State, Plus Communication, University of Washington WWAMI program, and Washington Companies. Thank you all so much. All right, is everybody ready for our final presentations? Thank you for listening and for keeping your attention. Before the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution in 1920, giving women the right to vote nationally, Montana was already a trendsetter, electing the first woman, Jeannette Rankin, to Congress in 1916. That doesn't mean barriers don't exist, or didn't exist then either. A mere decade later, the Billings School Board decided to implement a marriage bar, banning married women from employment because her husband should provide for her. One proponent stated, "Single women with their living to make should not be penalized by having positions open to them otherwise taken by a woman who has married failures." That's interesting. Thankfully, bold women broke these barriers, allowing women today to not only be part of the conversation, but also shape policy. Please join me in welcoming the Women Shaping Policy panelist and moderator, Candace Carr-Strauss, and the Montana Chamber's Vice President of Communications and Marketing.
Thanks, everyone. We're the last session of the day before our acknowledgement of our champions of business and the Lawmakers Appreciation Reception. So I'm very honored that we found space today to speak to Breaking Barriers, Women Shaping Policy in Montana. And the impetus for this panel came about with our inaugural Blazing Trails Montana Women in Business Summit happening March 6th through 8th in Bozeman, Montana at the AC Hotel and Kimpton Armory Hotel. It's part of International Women's Day celebration on March 8th, and the goal of that is to inspire inclusion. When we inspire others to understand and value women's inclusion, we forge a better world. And when women themselves are inspired to be included, there's a sense of belonging, relevance, and empowerment. So it is our hope that in March, we will do that from Montana women from throughout the Treasure State and all 56 counties. We'll be releasing our agenda later this week, so please look to see who from your area will be joining us in Bozeman to speak. But with that, I want to welcome these two esteemed ladies and native Montanans to the stage, trailblazers in their own right, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. So our Commissioner of the Department of Labor and Industry, Sarah Swanson, and Jennifer Spall, our Vice President of Corporate Responsibility for State and Local Government with JP Morgan Chase. So Sarah, if you'd like to start.
I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you this afternoon. I recognize we're the last panel between you and the reception, so I hope this is worth it. My name's Sarah Swanson, lifelong Montanan. I hail from eastern Montana, born and raised in the Glasgow community. I spent a lot of time in rooms just like this with all of you. I had the honor of serving on the chamber board for about 6 years while I was running my own company and got to be a part of designing and implementing the first phase of Envision 2026. And so what a treat it is for me to have the honor to serve Montana as a cabinet member while we're trying to implement the final phase of 2026 to hit those goals. I spent the better part of 2 decades owning and operating my own company as the third generation of my family to do so. We were a 5-store John Deere dealer organization by the time we sold that company in 2018. We were headquartered in Glasgow, and over several years we acquired locations in communities like Plentywood, Culbertson, Circle, and for a brief time we had a presence in Glendive. We sold that company in 2018, and I tried to retire. And if you ever get a chance to meet my boys, they're 22 and 23, they'll pretty unequivocally tell you that was the worst year of everyone's lives. So I tried to find a way to re-engage and find something else to do here in Montana. And I really focused in on the part of our business that I found myself enjoying the most towards the end, which was a creative grow your own solution to workforce challenges in rural and remote eastern Montana. Our territory was large. We covered about a third of Montana geographically from those small locations. We went from the western edge of the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation to the North Dakota border, and from the Canadian border to the northern edge of the Northern Cheyenne Nation. It was a large territory that we covered, and what you won't find anywhere within that region is a community college or a four-year campus institution in Montana. We had 16 high schools and one tribal college with which to grow our own workforce, and we had to get pretty creative, but I think we did a good job. And so that took me back into the workforce development space. I joined the Montana Contractors Association, and we tried to scale and operationalize some of the tricks we tried at Farm Equipment Sales, and that turned into a program called Build Montana that's going really well to scale young people in high school into full career credentials in the equipment and ag industries before they graduate, allowing them to choose whether to enter the workforce with a credential right after high school or to go on to higher education right away. That journey took me to the OPI, where I served as the chief of staff for a year, really working on staff stabilization and a long-term strategy around recruitment of both OPI staff and some programmatic elements for our young people, allowing them different access to trades while still in high school. Then I joined the governor's team, had the honor of serving him as Director of Strategic Engagement for 2 years, housed at the Department of Labor, again focusing on connecting large industries where we could scale workforce opportunities for high school students through public-private partnerships. And in August of this year, I had the opportunity to lead the organization, and it's truly an honor to serve Montana and to get to really do the good work of the Department of Labor and Industry alongside many of my colleagues in the cabinet. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Spall. I'm sixth generation Montana. My family helped found Lincoln County, and I grew up with Julie in Kalispell. I went on to Montana State, and I don't know who knows John Brendan in this room. He's my neighbor on the lake. Tell him I said nice things. But when I started to show an interest in debate and in politics in high school, he meddled his way and helped me a lot. When I was in college, I worked for Roscoe Reberg. I went on to work for Burns, and then I graduated high school or college. I was like, what am I going to do next? I ended up in New Mexico. I worked for Governor Gary Johnson as his press secretary. I worked for the House Minority as their press secretary for a while. I worked at Intel Corporation, where I learned project management and really got my arms around land use, because we built, it was the first in the nation, a high school for the community, and we turned over the keys in exchange for water bonds, which was a unique project. And then I got divorced, and I did not like New Mexico. There was no water there. There's mountains, but no water. And you know, when you grow up in Montana, I'm sure many of you have lost children outside the state, there aren't a lot of jobs here, especially for what we do. You got less than 5% of the country cares about politics. Less than 1% are as crazy as we all are and actually engage in it on a day-to-day basis. So you either go to Denver or you go to Seattle, and I went to Seattle because my dad had Seahawks tickets and I knew I would see him regularly. And I continued to work in government and in policy. I worked on a lot of land use. I picked up and worked for public affairs firms and did ag clients, did nuclear, did GMOs, did a whole bunch of stuff. And then one day I got a call from Walmart. And I worked for Walmart for 12 years. I was promoted 5 times. I had to spend time in Bentonville. I don't recommend it. And when I left, before I got my last promotion, I managed 21 western states and a team of probably 30 lobbyists and direct reports. And when I ended my career at Walmart and left, I was in control of all political money, all political and grassroots outreach, and all PAC spending and fundraising. So that happened right around COVID. We just made the decision as a family that that was not the place for us. My husband grew up in Washington State. And so we moved back to Washington State, and I just kind of bounced around and did my own thing for a while, tried to figure out what was next, and then COVID hit. And during the middle of COVID, JP Morgan Chase called. And I thought, I don't know anything about banking, but I took the job. So now I'm with the firm. I'm based in Seattle, and I went from 9 states last year. I have 7 states this year, including, for the first time in my career, Montana. So and right now I live in Seattle with my young son and my husband and a couple of very needy dogs.
Thanks, ladies. Sorry, I feel like I with you guys, like my back is to you with this podium here. But we have another powerhouse woman who has just joined us this afternoon. And although she's not on the stage, I wish to recognize Lieutenant Governor Kristen Juras has just joined us. And she has graciously agreed to be our honorary chair for our first Montana Women in Business Summit. So you will be able to hear her at a fireside chat led by Nancy Schlepp, our board chair, at that event to kick off Thursday morning. So thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. So with that, ladies, the name of the panel is Breaking Barriers, Women Shaping Policy. So can you each please give some examples of challenges that you faced, barriers that have been put up in your career, and how you've really gone about breaking them?
So I think, giving out my age here, but I think when I started in politics, there were like 3 acceptable jobs. You could be the press secretary, you could be the fundraiser, or you could be the scheduler. And that was pretty much it, and that was limiting. If you spoke up in a room, you were too bossy. If you dared talk over somebody, you were too aggressive. Some of that's still there. I actually watched there's a CEO roundtable in Seattle, and I watched a woman take down a couple of guys who kept interrupting and speaking over men, or kept speaking over the speaker, who happened to be elected officials. So that's still there, but really limited opportunities very early. But I think that the one thing that I was very grateful for was I had men as allies. I had John Brendan helping me out. When I went to Conrad Burns' office, anybody who came out of the Burns team knows that Conrad kind of kept everybody networked and helped you look out for each other. And then when I made the big switch from going from the public sector kind of over to the private sector, I think Rich White's still here somewhere from Boeing. Rich and I both worked on the Dole campaign. And when I got to Seattle, I connected with him and just kind of picked his brain about what was it like working at Boeing. And, did I really want to go make a jump like that at some point? But the doors have opened tremendously, and especially in the last 10 years. I'm seeing where I used to be the only female lobbyist in the room, I'm now seeing at least 25 to 35% are now women.
Well, I have developed a bit of a reputation for being aggressive. For those of you that I've met, I think we've probably experienced that a few times. I come by it honestly. I cut my teeth in the ag industry at a time where I was almost always the only woman in the room. I had to teach an entire sector of eastern Montana farmers and ranchers who were very good at what they did, that I was also very good at what I did. And that took some doing, and the result is leading me here to public service. But I had the ability to really work hard through the private sector to get to where I was before I had to enter the arena of politics or policy. I'll never forget when I went to my first meeting that I'd been invited to, hosted by the John Deere CEO down in Moline, Illinois. It was a subsect of about 100 dealers from around the country, and so I was really honored to be invited. And we started about 10 minutes late. And being from Glasgow or from eastern Montana, or maybe just from Montana in general, I'm a big believer that we start on time. And so I remember being frustrated, looking around at why the heck aren't we starting on time? Everybody's in their seat. Finally, the CEO took to the mic in front of everybody and he said, "Well, I'm sorry that we're late, folks, but we'll get started when the dealer from Montana is here." As the only woman in the room, I had to stand up and raise my hand and say, "She's here." By the time I left the industry in 2018, occasionally I'd go to an event like that and there'd be another woman or two in the room. And then I left the industry 5 years ago. It was really a treat last year. I got invited on behalf of Build Montana to go back out to DC and meet with the Associated Equipment Distributors. They were actually giving Build Montana their National Workforce Development Opportunity Award, so we flew out to accept that. And at that event, just 5 years after I left the industry, they had an entire reception about women in the equipment industry, and there were 150 women in the room. So I think it's changing, but that was really my experience of stepping in, is almost always being the only female in the room and having to earn our space.
So next question is, in what ways can women in policy actively engage with their communities to foster positive change? And conversely, how can businesses and community members support women in policy working to shape the future of Montana?
I think women across Montana, whether you're running your family or your company or your ranch or a state agency, I think our drivers are almost all the same, and right now they're all economic. Am I doing better than I was last year? Can I support my family? Can my family thrive on the money that I bring home every month? Really, when we look around the landscape in Montana, while the policy decisions might be made in Helena, the economic drivers are in our communities and in our homes and in our businesses. Our city councils, our county commissions, our school boards, all of those local associations, and then our state associations, just like the chamber, that are representing industry, are really where we need women to engage. We know what we need to drive our families and our communities and our companies, and it really starts at that local level. Before we ever start advocating in Helena, there's work to be done at home. So whether that's with your city council or your school board or all of these industry associations like the chamber, there's plenty of room for all of us to advocate for the issues that are creating opportunity for our families to thrive economically.
Absolutely. The one thing that really sets me off and is my pet peeve in politics is when I walk into a room and people assume that I am advocating for childcare or I'm doing a woman's issue. And all of them are women's issues. We care about the budget. We care about transportation. We care about everything. And it's kind of a disservice to dads to say you don't care about their education. It drives me insane when I walk into a room and somebody just assumes that because I'm a woman, I must be working on women's issues. Don't limit people when you bring them into committees, when you encourage them to get involved in something. Put them on an actual issue that they care about instead of pigeonholing them into something that you think that they should be in. And I see that happen sometimes on committees and in organizations. And I think the one thing about bringing women into the fold is they will often be at a meeting for the first time. They will be sitting in the back. They will be quiet. They don't know. They want to figure out the lay of the land and the lay of the room first, and they want to be 150% sure of everything that comes out of their mouth before they say it. So kind of keep your eye out on the quiet ones. They will show up, they will be prepared, they will be engaged. And women always get involved, everybody gets involved in politics for a strange reason. It could be that something in your neighborhood ticked you off and you decided to go take on city council or the school board or whatever. And then it grows into something bigger.
Terrific. Well, you've both mentioned male allies along the way who have helped you, but who are some women in policy that have inspired you, coached you, mentored you, and how are you yourself looking back at younger generations coming up and helping them move forward in their careers?
When I entered state government 3 years ago, it was quite the culture shock coming from the private sector at just how interesting these state agencies are to navigate. I am so fortunate that I get to work with a really incredible team as part of Governor Gianforte's administration, not the least of which is Lieutenant Governor Juris at the helm. But we have a really strong group of female leaders across the cabinet. Our chief of staff, our director of administration, many of my colleagues on the cabinet are also strong women leaders who do a really good job of looking out for one another and making sure we have what we need. With our team within the Department of Labor, 6 of my 10 members of the executive leadership staff are strong women, and our first appointee across the agency, using some of the flexibilities given to us by the last legislature, is a female from Eastern Montana, from Billings, that just joined our team on Monday. So we're able to build a bench of really strong women that are from Montana, that care about Montana, and really allowing us to focus on the mission of the work that we do every day, which is truly empowering Montanans to find opportunity through work.
So today is Margaret Thatcher Day in England, and that was one of the people that I look up to. I just thought that she was plain spoken and just no nonsense about everything, and I admired that. I had a lot of men as allies from some of the senators and the governors that I work for, but truly the one person who took me under their wing, it is also the anniversary of her death. I was 21, and I showed up in New Mexico at a Republican event right after the elections. Governor Johnson had been the first Republican in decades to take the seat. And I was standing in line next to the most impeccably dressed woman in the world. And she turned to me and started making catty jokes about inappropriate things people were wearing and the fact that there was no shrimp and that the booze was poor. And I was like, this is my kindred spirit. So she starts talking to me, and she's just like, what are you doing now? And I said, I just graduated college. I'd worked on the Dole campaign. I'd worked for NDC. You know, Pete Domenici's trying to help me out here. And she said, why don't you come to work for me? And I said, okay. I had no idea who this woman was. And she said, I'm Governor Gary Johnson's deputy chief of staff. Do you want to come work for me? I'm like, yes, I do. I'll come help with the transition. So I went up there and I met Catherine. Her name is Catherine Bedell. When she was 24 magna cum laude out of Tulane, Ronald Reagan took a chance on her. She was the woman she worked for Bush Reagan for 12 years. She started in the White House and she did all of the appointees. So anybody who wanted a board or commission or anything else, she ran that. She had to work for Nancy. She ran the gauntlet with everything else. So she had this huge breadth of experience that I had not come across anybody who had that. I knew some people here in Montana who had run for the State House. I knew of people who were in certain positions elsewhere, but I hadn't had the opportunity, somebody who had gone all the way to the White House and had that kind of a gamble taken on them. So she took me under her wing, and for better or for worse, she let me kind of run my own show. I did all of the speeches for cabinet secretaries, anything for the First Lady, anything for the Lieutenant Governor, and then anything that the governor was doing that was like under 10 minutes. She managed the main messaging, she managed everything else, but I learned soup to nuts, everything, and very quickly. And you had to learn so many areas of policy so fast when you've got that many cabinet secretaries and that many initiatives going on. So we left the office and we went to work on a private project for the governor, which was spent fuel storage with a tribe. And I worked with her there for a while, and then I just decided, maybe it's time for something else. I'm going to go do private sector. So I said goodbye to her, and I thought, well, maybe we'll keep in touch. We kept in touch constantly. If I didn't know what I wanted to do next, when I moved from New Mexico to Seattle, she said, you don't have any agency experience, go work for an agency. I did that, great experience. If I got stuck on something, I would call her, I would just check in with her. Her husband was the governor's pilot and he died of cancer. So when I got a cancer diagnosis, I called her and I could lean on her. When she got cancer, I went out and her husband at the time looked at me and said, it's like 20 years have gone by and you two talked yesterday. You picked it up. Because I walked in and I organized her. She was like the Tasmanian devil, just everything everywhere, Pigpen from Peanuts. And I walked in and I knew that this was the most important thing I could do for her was get all of her affairs in order because she had less than a month to live. And she just was, I miss her dearly. I miss her advice and her counsel. And I hope everybody can find somebody like that in their lives. But that, I think, was the big eye-opening thing for me was here was this woman in the 80s who blazed trails, and she was taking the time to coach a 22-year-old along.
Those are great stories. Thank you for sharing. And so in our last few minutes, if you could just speak to what do you envision for the future of women working in the policy realm, and how can upcoming generations contribute to shaping a more inclusive landscape?
I hope that we see more women, and especially Montana women, that will step into the ring and advocate, advocate, advocate. The first time I ever came to Helena to advocate for a nuanced issue in the ag industry was 2013. It was this little pesky issue bothering equipment dealers called the business equipment tax. It took 10 years for groups like the Chamber to finally get that thing fixed even a little bit, but we had to keep advocating. So sometimes it's okay to be aggressive, take up all the space you need. And whether you're advocating for your family, your community, or your industry, it's important to be at the table.
I think it's important to recognize that women get interested and get involved at a slower pace than men do. I see a lot of guys who just want to see their name on a yard sign, and they're going to run for office. They have no idea what they're talking about. I see women come through the ranks, and they've done school board, or they've sat on a commission with the county or the city, and they learn everything they can there, and then they're looking for their next step. And every woman that I've talked to who's run for office, nearly without fail, wanted to be 150% ready before they chose to run. They wanted to make sure that they knew all the answers, but then they quickly learned, no, this is a drop in the bucket. What I need to know, I will learn on the fly. But I think we need to be way more encouraging about getting women into committees and the baby steps first, and then let them decide where they want to grow from there. But having just a seat at the table is huge.
So before we conclude and give these ladies a round of applause, I would like to ask all of you to think about taking some action. Number one, to consider joining us on March 6th through 8th in Bozeman. Number two, gentlemen, to be an ally to women in policy, business, the nonprofit sector here in Montana. 3, to be a mentor for someone, anyone, not just necessarily a woman. Please give back. It's really important as we see this. And know that our Women in Business Summit, the proceeds from the event will go to support our child care efforts and legislation policy initiatives in the 2025 legislature. And child care is not just a women's issue. Unfortunately, a lot of the responsibility of caring for a child with the lack of any affordable and or even available childcare falls to a woman. It impacts families, it impacts employers and our workforce. So please consider joining us. And with that, can you give a round of applause to Sarah and Jen?